Geologists, by and large, are an odd breed of cat, and they sometimes get socially ostracized because some of the things they discover make them unpopular with many people. One of the things that geologists have discovered over the years is that we have just come through a great ice age. As a matter of fact, we're not really out of the ice age. This is called the Pleistocene. If you're putting it in your notes, you're wasting your time. The Pleistocene epoch, or ice age, during which great glaciers came down over the continents of the northern hemisphere and covered much of the known continents with ice. For example, here in the state of Pennsylvania, the ice advanced out of eastern Canada and came down as far south as Berwick, Pennsylvania, where it stopped and poured its meltwaters down the Susquehanna River past Selinsgrove and Sunbury. The other ice had come down over the Great Lakes, Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, etc., making these lakes, and came to a grinding halt on a line extending northeast from Oil City to Butler. In the center of the state, it never quite made it out of New York State. It ground to a halt at Oleans. It cut down across northern New Jersey, getting as far south as the Teaneck, Tenafly area, and then looking southward and seeing what was still to come, it quit. Out to the west, it came down as far as Kansas and swung across the Rockies. It covered all of northern Europe, extending across the North German plain to the northern edge of the Alps, across central Russia and down through much of Siberia. Now, you say, all right, so there was a little ice on the ground. Like today? No. How thick was this ice? Well, in Canada, it was 15,000 feet thick. 3 miles thick. How thick was it at Berwick, Pennsylvania? 5,000 feet. A mile of ice? You mean I could stand at Berwick and see a mile-thick wall of ice? See? Cold? Ooh, cold. Very cold. Bloomsburg, chilly as could be. So, where did this ice come from? From rainwater. Where did the rain come from? The oceans. Aha. Normally, water evaporates from the oceans, is carried over the land as clouds, precipitates as rain, and runs via the rivers back to the ocean. It cycles, which means it could rain for 40 days and 40 nights, and nothing would be drowned because sea level isn't going to change since the water that's raining is coming from the sea and going back to the sea. But suppose this rain falls and it freezes and stays as ice and does not run back to the sea. Well, then sea level would go down because I'm taking water from the sea, right? Right. And if the glaciers, which are 15,000 feet thick in their center and 5,000 feet thick at their edge and cover thousands and hundreds of thousands of square miles, build up, then sea level will drop a notable amount. During the greatest advance of the ice, sea level was down about 300 feet lower than it is today. And not all of the ice is melted. We have Antarctica and the polar ice caps. You see, ice caps in the Arctic and Antarctic regions are not very common. They're the vestige of the last ice age. If all the ice in the world melted today, which is the normal state of affairs, sea level would rise 90 feet above its present position, drowning Philadelphia, Boston, much of New York, about 2/3 of Florida, Georgia, the Okefenokee Swamp, Pogo, wiping out the east coast of the United States for a considerable distance inland, which might be beneficial, might not. We have little control over it. Now, we are able to record these fluctuations in sea level with great accuracy. And the last ice, we have a method called radiocarbon dating. Let me point out what this is. When you live and breathe and interchange carbon dioxide with the atmosphere, there is a certain ratio of carbon-14 isotope to carbon-12 isotope that you maintain. Finally, you die. Thunk. And the interchange with the atmosphere stops. And when it stops, the carbon-14 begins to break down to carbon-12, and we know the rate of breakdown. Therefore, by measuring the ratio of carbon-14 to carbon-12, we can tell how many years ago you died. How many years ago the tree was chopped down from which the caveman made his wooden handle. How many years ago the wood was taken and burned to make the charcoal in the pit we find in caves in the southern Magdalene region of France. We can date when Tutankhamun died because Tutankhamun is made of carbon, and so are the bandages which wrap him, and so is the wood of which part of his sarcophagus is made. Anything which ever lived, wood, paper, which comes from plant material, man, animal of any type, we can date. And from this, and the fact that the glaciers, when they came down, buried forests and killed trees, we can date when the glaciers were here. The last ice left Berwick, Pennsylvania. Why I keep coming back to Berwick, just happens that some work was done there. The last ice left Berwick, Pennsylvania, and Oil City, Zelianopol area, that line, about 8,000 years ago, about 6,000 BC. That's not very, geologically, that's yesterday. If you run fast, you can catch up with the ice. It's still retreating. Now, in a lifetime, 6,000 years is a long time, but not here. 6,000 BC. And as the ice retreated, it did not retreat all at once, you know. It retreated like this. And every time that ice fluctuated, sea level went up and down with it. The ice comes forward, sea level goes down, because the water's on the land. The ice melts, sea level goes up. And we can date the ice advance and retreat, so we can date the sea level, rise and fall. So what? So about 4,000 years ago, about 2,000, roughly 2,500 BC, there's what we call the post-glacial thermal maximum. Oh, the post-glacial thermal maximum. What an imposing mouthful. And what it means, of course, is a hot time since the ice left. Post-glacial, after the glacier, thermal maximum, it's hot. It is the warmest climate we have had since the ice left. We're cooling down a little today. It was warmer about 4,500 years ago, about 2,500 BC, or as we like to sometimes say, 4,500 BP, before present. It was quite a bit warmer, and sea level was higher. As a matter of fact, it got warm very quickly, and sea level went up like a bat out of hell. We have very, very clear evidence by studying sediments at the bottom of the oceans with core samplers that about 2,500 years ago, sea level rose about 20 feet in 50 years, which is a remarkable rise of sea level. My friend, if you live on a seacoast 10 feet above water and you live for 50 years and our water goes up 20 feet, you will be quite heavily shocked. And wet? Oh, it's rough. Well, over in the Near East, there is an area called the Mesopotamian Crescent. Oh, I'm not going to spell it. The Mesopotamian Crescent, which is the delta of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. It is the only really fertile area that you could cultivate there. And it was inhabited 2,500 years ago by a bunch of nomads. Now, a nomad was a man who wandered in a circle. He had a flock of sheep. And the sheep went around in a circle, and the nomad followed them. He spent his life looking at the southern end of northbound sheep. The hell of a life. But he went in his circle, and it was so designed that by the time he came back here, the grass had grown up again. And he kept going around the circle, catching up with his grass. Of course, he got to go faster and faster because the more the sheep went around, the more thoroughly the grass was fertilized, and therefore the faster he could go. But he spent his entire life in this lousy 25-mile circle. And to him, a trip to Harrisburg would have been the end of the world, which it is today anyhow. But obviously, he didn't know much, and his world was flat because the delta of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers is like the delta of the Nile or the delta of the Mississippi or the delta of the Amazon, Congo, Yangtze, and what have you, flat. Southern Louisiana is no place more than 5 feet above sea level, flat as a board. And here was this nomad in this fertile crescent, wandering in a circle, and wherever he looked, it was flat as a billiard table, because the nearest high ground was 150 miles away, and he didn't move 150 miles from his birthplace in 5 lifetimes. And the Mesopotamian crescent was nowhere for 150 miles of its length, more than 18 feet above sea level. And in 2500 BC, in one lifetime of 50 years, sea level rose 20 feet. That is, it drowned the Mesopotamian crescent, the land of the Urs and the Chaldeans. And if this was your world, and you watched the sea come in toward you in a lifetime, then a legend would have grown up among your people that the world was flooded. Ah, so. And eventually this would enter what we call a saga. Now, a saga, in modern terminology, is a movie made by Cecil B. DeMille. But this is an incorrect usage of the term. A saga is a very definite term. It means simply the early history of a people which occurred before that people learned to write, and which was subsequently written down in a saga. For example, the Bhagavad Gita, the Edda saga, the Norse sagas, the Icelandic sagas, so-called. These are the stories of the gods Wotan and the rest of them, who probably were people, various tribal chieftains and what have you, who lived before the Norse or the Hindi learned to write. And they had all kinds of great to-dos. He may have jumped a small creek. And for years, the story was passed by word of mouth among the professional storytellers. And finally, 1,000 years later, it was written down in the Norse sagas, by which time the creek had become a mighty river, because all storytellers, like professors, are essentially bull throwers. And the river had gotten bigger, and it entered the saga that the god Wotan leaped across the North Sea and fought the god Sigismund. Actually, a guy named Wody or something or other had jumped a small creek and slid in the mud. Thus, a saga is the history of an ethnic group written down so many years later that the storytellers had corrupted the facts, but an essential kernel of truth lies buried in the gut. Something did happen to a guy whose name sounded something like Wotan. Why? Because if I went to this young lady and said Belfont, and she started the word down, it would come out there, macaroni. The written word, you've all played, what is it, telephone, is not the most reliable means of communication. That's why I'm speaking to you today. The point is, this is a saga, and I would like to advance a geological notion to you that the Old Testament is a saga. It is the saga of a bunch of people who, for want of a better name, we will call the Israelites, and who came out of the Mesopotamian crescent about 2,000 years ago, and the stories were not written down till about 800 BC to 300 BC. In fact, we have very, very good evidence that the book of Job was written by 3 men at 3 different times, because the Aramaic style used in it is a style several hundred years apart, just like we no longer write Shakespearean English. And in fact, as the late Martin Buber pointed out, one of the 3 men couldn't even spell. The other 2 could. The Bible, the Old Testament, was the accumulation of written word over several hundred years after the storytellers had gotten to it for 1,000. What were these storytellers? Were they accurate? Legendarily, they were accurate. They were really not. They wandered from nomadic tribe to nomadic tribe, and they sat down and they told the story of your forefathers. You know, all kids say, "What was it like in the olden days, Daddy? What was it like when you were a kid?" Aren't you always intrigued by how your parents met and got married when you were a youngster? Well, these nomads were youngsters at the age of 50. And they listened bug-eyed to the professional storyteller, who incidentally passed his packet of stories from father to son. He couldn't tell the truth. Why? Because to the extent that he entertained the people, he was paid. If his story was good, he got a bull. If it was me, he got a cow. If it was he got a sheep. If it was he got a chicken. And if it was he got thrown out bodily. Therefore, each storyteller had to outdo his predecessor. He comes, I am going to tell you the story of the great flood. We don't want to hear about that. Josephus told us that same story last year. Yeah, but he didn't have the facts straight. Hear my version. And I'll diddle it up a little. And Moses and Noah built an ark. What's an ark? Does it sound familiar to you? He's a very funny man. What's an? He is. I think he's a genius. What's an ark? That's a very good question. Of what was the ark built? Wood. And what was it lined? Pitch. And how long was it? 30 cubits. What's a cubit? It's the distance from the elbow to the fingertip, a very reliable means of measure. There'd be no cubit the same in this whole class. Is it difficult to build? Difficult to build? On the Mesopotamian crescent? Yeah. Why? Because there are no trees and no wood on the Mesopotamian crescent. There's nothing but grass. The nearest wood is 150 miles away, and nobody traveled 150 miles. But the legend of the ark exists. Certainly it exists. Why? Because some storyteller got mouse-trapped. What do you mean? The storyteller said, and it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and the world was flooded. And some wiseacre around the fire said, hey, storyteller, if the world was flooded, how come Noah survived? How come all the animals survived? Well, he built a boat, and he put 2 of each kind of animal in it, and he floated on the water and was safe. And the next guy comes along and he said, same story. Now, we heard that version. And then people begin to ask questions. How did he know when it was safe to come out of the ark? He didn't have a periscope. He wasn't submersible. He didn't have infrared line scanning devices. What did he have? A dove. And it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. But if it rains for 40 days and 40 nights, nothing will happen. Oh, well, it's allegory. No, it isn't allegory. It's baloney. Because to the ancients, 40 days of rain, ma foi, 40 days of rain, that'll flood everything. You're living through 5 days of rain right now, and nothing is happening except everything on campus is wet. But it is anyhow all wet, so it doesn't really matter. And in due time, among the nomads of the Chaldeans in the land of Ur, they were swept up en passant by a great military horde. To take a pawn in chess, en passant, means to take it in passing. You don't pay any attention to it, just knock it down on the way. You know, like the German army rolled through the Netherlands on the way to France. These were the Egyptians. They were after the Assyrians. There are some people call the Israelites here. Well, send a platoon out and grab them. You know, we think the Israelites were a great nation. Conquerors. No. We happen to have their history book, their saga, to the local Egyptian Hottentots and satraps. They were like, what the hell is this smaller? Knock him off en passant. Let's go find Sennacherib, or what have you. Sennacherib was later. Let's go find Hammurabi and the rest. And they had some hellacious fights. And on the way, they scooped up, according to the Egyptian records, about 2,000 slaves from the land of Ur and the Chaldeans. Were these important slaves to the Egyptians? Oh, yes, they were. Oh, no, they weren't. The Egyptians, you see, had over 250,000 slaves, of which a lousy 2,000 were these Israelites. To the Old Testament, very important. To the Egyptian auditor general in charge of slaves, less than 10%. And so they are enslaved in Egypt, or so. And there is born the man Moses, who was meek above all men. And he was found in the bulrushes, floating in a basket, by the daughter of Pharaoh. And I'll bet there is no girl in this class that could tell her father that story and get away with it. Found him in the bulrushes, eh? When do you think I was born, girl? But Pharaoh, like most fathers, covered for his daughter. And he said, stand back here, girl. Anybody doesn't believe that story? I believe Pharaoh. I'm going to fight you, buddy. All right? And so Pharaoh adopts him as his son or grandson, and Moses is brought up in the palace of the Pharaoh. And let me point out to you that he received what is unquestionably, or was unquestionably, the finest education available at the time, including China. He was trained by the high priests of ancient Egypt, who knew how to write and who knew how to rule by fear. And that education was not equaled until Athens, over 1,000 years later. This was about 1800 B.C., according to the very, very sketchy Egyptian records. 1750 to 1800 B.C., about. And this man, Moses, was trained in military operations, because the Egyptians were a warlike people. He was trained in administration and rule, which the high priests of ancient Egypt and the pharaohs had practiced since about 3800 B.C., or since 3000 B.C. with the time of Amenhotep. Many of you are aware of a famous statue of an ancient Egyptian queen with a long swan-like neck, one of the most beautiful women supposedly who ever lived, Queen Nefertiti. And there's a great deal to do, but Queen Nefertiti, but you forget that her husband was Amenhotep. And Amenhotep was quite a remarkable guy. He lived along with his queen about 3000 B.C. And he advanced an idea which was so detestable to the ancient priests of Egypt that when he died, they buried his idea with him. And his idea was monotheism. There is in existence a papyrus dating from the time of Amenhotep, arguing that there are not many gods, but one almighty God. And when Amenhotep died, the high priests of ancient Egypt, who had 20-some-odd gods, buried this cotton-picking idea with him. And only a few selected people ever got to read it. Oh, yeah, that's nice. And now Moses, for some reason I can't quite figure out, but I suspect it's because he lost the battle with Pharaoh's son for the throne, decides to lead a group of slaves to freedom. He may have been an Israelite. And so the ancient storytellers record how Moses obtained freedom. First, we have the 10 plagues. Oh, what plagues, brethren. Boils. Boils? With the sanitation they had in ancient Egypt, everybody had boils, acne, and carbuncles. Vermin. Vermin? Until the Middle Ages. Today I can take you out in the world and show you vermin everybody scratched in ancient Egypt. Obey. Only the nobility. Darkness. Yeah. An eclipse. Is there an eclipse at about that time? Yes. Did the penumbra pass over Egypt? Yes. Thank you. Frogs. Frogs. Every time the Nile flooded, and the ancient Egyptians knew this, and turned its backwaters into swamps, the frogs multiplied. But if you were a slave in the desert and finally got to see these swamps and the frogs, it was a plague. But there was one plague you can't easily explain. What's that? The Nile ran like blood. The waters turned red. No explanation. Until about 5 years ago, when the Russians started to build the Aswan High Dam on the Nile. And, as a precautionary measure, they flew the whole upper drainage basin of the Nile River looking for possible landslides such as wiped out the dam in Italy, where the landslide comes down and sloshes water over the dam. And did they find it? They found evidence of a great ancient landslide. And was this a horrible landslide? 2.5 cubic miles of material fell into the Nile River. And what is this material? Red clay, which floats down the river in suspension. Ugh. And when did it occur? Well, it so happens that on the way down to the river, it buried a forest. Yeah? Can you date when it buried the forest? See, radiocarbon dating. What's the date? About 1770 B.C. Thank you, buddy. In other words, the Nile ran red with mud. Now, you're an ancient storyteller. Are you going to come up before these people and say, and brethren, Moses said, Shah! And the Nile ran red with mud? How are you going to impress the people? Moses went, Shazam! And the Nile ran red with blood. And is there anyone to say no? Nobody was there who's still alive. Blood is always much prettier than mud, although sometimes I think the two are not easily separable. So we know how the Nile ran red with mud. And how about the slaying of the firstborn son? It is recorded at that time that the firstborn son of Pharaoh died. But I suspect it was only the firstborn son of Pharaoh, just he. And the storytellers could easily sweep it across and make it anybody. I'm guessing. Anyhow, Moses finally gets the freedom of his people, or a people. And he starts eastward. And he picks up a couple of dust devils and whirligigs on the way that you see in the desert every place, which the storytellers record as a pillar of smoke and flame, you know. The dust! Across the Egyptian desert today, what do you see? Spirals of dust. And they finally come to what is called the Red Sea. Called by who the Red Sea? By us, not by the ancient Egyptians. No, the Aramaic word renta does not mean red, it means reed. It was a reed sea. That is, it was a swamp. It was the Egyptian Hackensack Meadows. Now, this swamp, which we call the Red Sea, or which is the Reed Sea, is subject to a tidal bore. What the hell's a tidal bore? On a long, narrow inlet, as the tide comes in, it concentrates and tends to come in as a high wall. The Bay of Fundy, up north of us, off New England, has a 19-foot tidal range. The Garonne River in France has an 11-foot bore that rushes up the river at tidal change. Did the Egyptians know about this bore? Oh, yes. We can find it in their ancient records. They knew that the Reed Sea was drained of its water and flooded suddenly with water by an advancing wall twice a day. To it, the tides. And the Egyptian instructions are very clear. They say to the caravan leader, wait by the side of the Reed Sea until the water has withdrawn, and then cross. But when you do, make haste, traveler, for in 12 hours, or what we call 12 hours today, the waters will return. Here comes Moses. Did he know about this? Hell, he was trained by these people. Did the slaves know about it, that he had freed? What were these Israelites marching to freedom? They were a bunch of illiterate, filthy, dirty, semi-barbarians who had been in slavery for 1,000 years. They knew nothing. Where would they have learned it? They didn't bathe. Where the hell do you get water in the desert? Who taught them to write? Hell, only the priests knew how to write. They were a bunch of illiterate barbarians, and they must have stunk to high heaven. But here they go, following Moses. And we arrive at the Red Sea, the Reed Sea, and it happens that the tide is in. What does Moses do? Read the Old Testament. He camps by the side of it, and everybody's sweating it because the Egyptians are coming behind them. Hey, Moses, Moses, of course, says, don't worry, they're at least 12 hours behind us, and the tide will go out. Stick with me, people, stick with me. And he's going to lead them by fear. He's going to put the fear of God into them. And finally, when the tide starts to pull out, he takes his staff, clunk, clunk, Shazam! Okay? I'll be goddamn, we're crossing the bay of dry land. How about that? And is Moses smart? Oh, boy, is he smart. He gets to the far side. Does he take off? Oh, no. Stop. Turn around. Look back. How about that? And Pharaoh and the rest of the Egyptians are drowned? No. But it said so in Cecil B. DeMille. I don't care what it said in Cecil B. DeMille. The Egyptian records at the time note the leaving of 2,000 slaves. But I hate to say this, people, they didn't even bother to chase them because they didn't care that much. There is no death of a pharaoh recorded, and the Egyptians carefully recorded the deaths of their pharaohs. The pharaoh at the time kept living happily ever after. Hey, I'll go chase those damn 2,000 buggers. I don't want them. Let them go. And they did. The storytellers, I think, when the waters rolled back, put the Egyptians down there to drown. This might be causing a psychological impasse affecting those same people today. For all I know, it might have been a good move. In any event, here's Moses on the far side. And what does it say in the Old Testament? These people didn't want freedom. They hankered back after the flesh pots of Goshen, and Goshen is Egypt. Just like Goshen is New York. Baghdad on the subway. Moses, I want to go to that damn desert. Take me back. I don't care if I'm a slave. I got food. You don't feed me. Who wants freedom? What's with this Jeffersonian democracy bit? I want to go back. I'm willing to be a slave so long as I get... It's difficult to make people free. You got to make them free. It takes years before they start to fight for it on their own. You got to convince them it's worth fighting for. What's with this freedom bit? I got food. I got water. I got women. What the hell do I want to be free for? Because if I'm free, I got problems, right? Right. But now somebody's taking care of me, right? Right. What's with this freedom bit? You got to sell it. And boy, it's hard to sell. You don't believe me? Ask the Daily Collegian. They've been trying to sell it for 10 years. It's hard. Oh. How is Moses going to convince them not to go back? We got a guy on our side, people, that you want to stay with. Oh, he's strong. He rolled back the waters of the Red Sea, right? Right. You want to cross him? No, I don't think so. Stick with me, because I am his spokesman. Just sort of a later-day Billy Sunday, right? Moses, I'm thirsty. Water! Water! Where is this Yahweh, this God of yours? I want water. All right, buddy, I'll take care of it. I happen to have read in my training Egyptian Desert Survival Manual TM-34-6. Such a papyrus exists without that name, and it speaks of what today we call desert varnish. Desert varnish is an iron manganese airborne compound that coats rocks in the desert. And an experienced desert traveler in southwestern Arizona knows that the rocks are coated with this black, shiny substance which seals cracks and openings in the rock in which water is trapped. Not a hell of a lot of water, but enough to assuage your thirst if you know how to find it. And the Egyptian papyrus says, traveler, take your staff and tap the rock until you hear a hollow sound. Then break the coating and the water will come forth. Moses says, you want water? Lord! Tap, 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 clonk. Lord, water! Well, what the hell do you want, Jack? And, of course, the storytellers took that lousy pint and a half of dirty water and made it a veritable river. That's the storyteller. He brought water from the rock. I can bring water from the rock today, too. Just show me the rock and give me something to tap it with. But the nomads, the barbarians, the ignorant ones, whoa, he brought water out of a rock. Oh, I'm with you, Moses. Oh, boy, I'm sticking with you. I'm hungry, Moses. Where's this guy Yahweh? I want dinner. Moses lucked out. How did he? In the Negev desert of what is today southern Israel, which in those times was a land overflowing with milk and honey, the Negev has dried up in the last few thousand years. If you stand today where Moses stood on Mount Nebo and look forth over the land of Moab, you would see today a desert. But in ancient times, it would have been a land overflowing in milk and honey, and it had a tree called the St. John's bread tree. And the St. John's bread tree is a very interesting tree. It has a pollen, airborne, which is a pulpy mass about the size of a baseball and very starchy, in which the seeds are embedded. And it's wafted on the wind, just like you see pollen today, causing hay fever. And you can eat it. It's starchy. So what? So in the sands of the Sinai Peninsula, we find layers of these things where great windstorms swept them out of the land of Moab and dropped them on the Sinai Peninsula. And we can date them. And they date around 1730 B.C. Oh, say, Moses lucked out. Here, you want manna from heaven? Here, eat. It doesn't taste for shut up, tastes good. It's starchy, isn't it? It's manna from heaven. I eat. And Moses finally feels the time upon him. He goes up to Mount Sinai, and he spends a considerable time there, and he comes down with a document. This document is called the Ten Commandments, about which I will have more to say later. This is it. 1 to 10. To my mind, the ultimate asininity of Western man are those stone tablets with 10 Roman numerals on it that you can see in many places. There were no Roman numerals on it when Moses came down off Mount Sinai. Did he have any trouble making that tablet? No. The head of the Israeli Geological Survey today is a very, very thoroughly trained Cambridge geologist by the name of Dr. Yaakov Bentor. Very competent guy who did the geology of Mount Sinai. It's an igneous intrusive made of a rock called granodiorite, and it undergoes spalling. Thermal expansion and contraction combined with chemical weathering causes thin layers to flake off. They flake off a curved surface, and the rock is jointed or broken by two sets of cracks. And Bentor climbed up onto the mountain, and within a half hour on top, he found 32 specimens of these spalled off blocks with a curved top that looked something like this. 32 of them lying around loose. Pick them up and bring them home. He took a photograph of them. He just stacked them up. They flake off by thermal expansion and contraction. I suggest when Moses got up there were the tablets. Pick one up and start chiseling, buddy. Did you ever bother to think what language he wrote in? Aramaic had not been invented. The only written language at the time was hieroglyphics, which Moses knew. But you could hardly have brought a hieroglyphic tablet down the mountain to the people with the golden calf and said, see? What are all those funny little lines? What the hell do they know about hieroglyphics? Also, for some reason, most Israelis have a little trouble imagining that the Ten Commandments were written in Egyptian hieroglyphics. It doesn't fit the picture I want to look at, buddy. But that's the only thing it could have been written in. Aramaic n'existe pas. Oh, boy. Finally, Moses feels it in the gut. Joshua, and what does the Old Testament say? And the wisdom of Moses was passed to Joshua. Listen, Josh, you got to rule these people by scaring the hell out of them. Now, let me give you a quick Egyptian education. Sit down and listen, buddy. Yak, 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 yak. Joshua takes over. Follow me. I got the mantle of power. This is aggression. What do you mean aggression? We're swooping down here to attack these peaceable people. This land was promised us by Yahweh. Therefore, we can take it. Is this right? Some years ago, there was a man named Adolf Hitler who said to the Czechs, the Sudetenland is occupied by Germans. Therefore, we're going to take it. And the world said, you son of a bitch. But what the hell is the difference? What is the difference? There is none. I'm going to take it because my people are living there is a somewhat better excuse, frankly, than I'm going to take it because something told me it was mine. Oh, that's a hell of a law. Of course, it works if your armies are bigger and stronger, and so we come marching along. And here's the walled city of Jericho. Ooh, there are actually 5 or 6 Jerichos. And the Israeli archaeologists have worked out the sequence, and we can date and know the biblical Jericho at around 1680 B.C. And as you know, 2 spies were sent into the city and were entertained by a lady of the demi-monde named Rahab, the original Scarlet Woman, because she dropped the scarlet thread. And finally, it became necessary to conquer this walled city. But could these nomads conquer a walled city? Hell no, the Jerichoans would have wiped the floor with them. But did the Egyptians know how to conquer a walled city? They did it every day. And Joshua had learned from Moses the military machinations of the Egyptians. And so, some years ago, the Israeli Geological Survey was prospecting for groundwater around Jericho, setting off charges of dynamite and reading the shock patterns on seismographs, and they discovered an uncoupling effect. What's an uncoupling effect? It means there's a hole in the ground, and the sound is bounding forth between it. Is it a cave? But there are no caves in that area. Caverns, but it isn't limestone. And so they did some exploration, and they found tunnels. And in these tunnels were wood. And this wood could be dated, and it dated at about 1680 B.C. Ooh. You mean the Israelites tunneled under the walls of Jericho? Exactly, an old Egyptian trick. They just mined the walls. They sapped them. Wait a minute, smart guy. If I'm living in Jericho, wouldn't I have heard those guys down there digging under the walls? Not if everybody was marching around the walls blowing trumpets for 7 days. 7 days and 7 nights. Have you ever heard a ram's horn? It sounds like... You had 1,000 people going, Judas, priest, take the damn city. I give up. Give me a night's sleep. That's all I want. That's all. You didn't hear anything you couldn't hear yourself think. Oh boy. And so finally the chief engineer comes back and he says, Josh, yeah, we're ready to pull the rope and let the walls come down. Okay. Extra big blow on the trumpet. Pull the rope. Charge. In any event, Joshua, as the Old Testament said, put a curse upon the city of Jericho. And the curse said, no man shall ever build there again. And I suspect he didn't want anyone to build there because they'd have found the tunnels. Well, what is the outcome of all this, people? What am I trying to say? That the Bible is hogwash? That religion is baloney? That God doesn't exist? No. I am trying to say that the Old Testament is a saga, the story of an ancient people, much distorted by word of mouth. But does this have anything to do with the existence of God? No. Is this a support of atheism? No. Does geology shed any light on God or his existence? No. It simply offers good scientific explanations for the physical miracles of the Old Testament. Today, we are too educated, too learned, too knowledgeable to fall for these hocus-pocus miracles. I'll make the water go back. I'll bring water out of a rock. I'll knock down the walls of Jericho. I'll stop the sun in the middle of its track. Come on. We're too sophisticated. This is great for nomads. I'm scared. But not for us. We are no longer scared, and to the effect that we know, we have less fear. But there is one miracle in the Old Testament, which is not a physical miracle, which after having lived many years, I'm unable to explain to my satisfaction except one way. And this is the following. That the man Moses, and I don't care what he was or what his background was or whether he was Pharaoh's daughter's bastard son or what have you, went up to the top of Mount Sinai, came down with a stone tablet. And on these stone tablets were 10 commandments, which are really a code of law, morals, and an ethic. First five say you will do this, And the second 5 say you will not do this. You all know that. The 5 are split. And the thing I want to point out to you is that this code of law and ethics, a very simple one, has a remarkable similarity to all other codes of ethics of all of the other great religions of the world. I don't care what they are, Taoism, Confucianism, Buddhism, Mohammedanism, they all have a common ethic, and they're all the same. And yet Confucius did not know Moses, and Buddha did not know either of them, and Zoroaster didn't know him, yet they have the same common concept. And let me point out to you that Moses came down off the mountain with this ethic, with this moral code, and he presented it to a bunch of nomads. Couldn't even read. God knows what language he wrote it in, if any. I don't know what you got there, buddy. Is it a bill? What is it? And he gave it to these people who couldn't comprehend it. And it is the highest code of ethics that we have yet developed. And today, in the year 1968, with our BS, MS, PhDs in philosophy, psychology, and what have you, we have not developed a better one. And the most sophisticated and cosmopolitan of modern man still has a hell of a time living by it. And he goes to church every Sunday to make up for the fact that he doesn't live by it. It is the highest code that we, in our most sophisticated modern thinking, have yet developed, and it's the same damn code that was given to a bunch of nomads in the desert. And I find it very difficult to explain this, except by something beyond Moses. That's just my personal belief. I'm not trying to ram it down your throat. I'm willing to laugh at the miracles which are the hocus-pocus ones. But I also will not laugh in the presence of one I can't explain. Maybe one day we will. I don't know. In the meanwhile, geology has taken the Old Testament, which was a lovely fairy tale, and proven that actually it's a distorted version of what probably happened. And if you haven't read it, do. It's a really charming book. We'll see.